Welcome on this wonderful Friday. I am so pleased to have with us here Professor Kirt von Daacke, who is the professor of history with a strong focus on the South and slavery. And he is going to introduce himself a bit later and say a few words, but he is also featured in the film, so you will learn much about him. And I understand that he also said that he thinks he met all of you at orientation, or some of you. How many of you remember him at orientation?
Everyone in college?
No.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, okay.
What are you, engineering? Engineering? Who's in the college? Show hands for college. Everybody with their hands up. You met me during summer orientation. Right, little Donnie, you like, or everything kind of folk. So, you saw me, whether that's good or bad. I don't know.
All right, there's no better introduction than that. Eduardo Montes-Bradley is the filmmaker, and Eduardo is a filmmaker extraordinaire. He's done the film on Julian Bond. He's done the film on Rita Dove. Don't know if you had an opportunity to see them during the film festival, but they were fabulous, and we had both Rita Dove and Julian Bond in the audience and on the panel. And Eduardo has much to say about films and filmmaking. He has a long history and career, and thank you very much, Michael. He is our AV expert here tonight, helping us just put things up on the screen for you. Michael, thank you so much. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you a 17-minute film that Eduardo made for the Commission on Slavery.
The United States is now commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, but that's also the 150th anniversary of emancipation. It's a good time for all of us to think about what emancipation meant, why it was needed, and also for us at the university to consider that this was an institution whose founder owned slaves, many of whose early faculty probably owned slaves, possibly even the university itself owned slaves. We're going to celebrate our bicentennial beginning in 2017, and I'd like to have this part of our past unearthed and understood before we begin that bicentennial.
The work that's taking place now in terms of building a research infrastructure will last for many years to come. So many people will learn from the work of the President's Commission on Slavery and University, the local advisory board, and the national advisory board. There are things that we have no way of understanding until we can get into the papers that have existed for some time, until we can interview individuals who may have some knowledge around the community, so we can explore some of the local entities such as churches where enslaved individuals, once they were free, had an opportunity to attend, and historians in general who have been doing work around slavery and institutions of higher education.
So we're aware of the fact that the university has a very tumultuous and troubled history, but I believe that we're in the most progressive period of time, really, at the University of Virginia. And a lot of that is thanks to the Commission for Slavery in the University. Those members, the administration, President Teresa Sullivan, really noticed our issue, and they decided to help us. And they decided that it was a vital part of our university's history. And so here we are today.
So I don't think this is a question of revisiting slavery in the university today. This is a question of actually exploring this long history that slavery was a part of Virginia in the 18th and 19th centuries. When the university is founded, the day it opens, there are between 90 and 120 slaves living here. This is something that has been insufficiently explored. I think there's a great teaching moment that's available here to bring community, students, and faculty together.
Clearly, the university was built in part by slave labor. I think more importantly, and something that really sort of pervades the sense of the university, is you have a founder of the university, Thomas Jefferson, who's known for the Declaration of Independence, and yet he was a slave owner.
I do believe that it's unfair to completely judge someone according to our standards and our mores, because we have access to information that another time may not have, and because we certainly do live in a very different moral atmosphere, let's say, or social atmosphere. On the other hand, I do believe that there's somewhere inside of each of us, we know instinctively what is right and what is wrong and what really goes too far.
I mean, the whole issue of slavery elicits sometimes very extreme viewpoints in many people, and Thomas Jefferson certainly does himself, and that's because he personifies all the contradictions in the nation when it was founded.
However, there are still some conservative elements at the university that feel that this research and this interest are unsuitable at this time, that there are other issues that the university needs to be grappling with. But I believe this is an important part of the university's history, and the university has always been historically minded about its past, and so I see this as another component that is worthy of the university's time, attention, and resources.
It is so difficult to visually reconstruct the past, especially in the 19th century around the topic of slavery. Photography only enters into the modern world in the 1840s and isn't widespread until after the end of slavery. Then there are artists, but not many, who choose to turn pen and sketch and occasionally paintings to the topic of slavery, but they're very few, and so our opportunities to visually see inside that world are very few.
We were fortunate enough to be involved in a project 2 years ago which identified previously unknown graves adjacent to and north of the university cemetery. And based on some documentary evidence from the late 19th century, we're very confident that these individuals that we identified there that were previously unknown, given the size, the number of individuals that were identified, the family units which were found there, children, youth, adults, and the spatial relationships of the graves, that this is the enslaved community of the University of Virginia.
So right now, the President's Commission on Slavery in the University is finishing its first year of existence. It is I think in a way, the culmination of about 10 years of ad hoc work by students doing research, by individual faculty projects in class, and by student energy outside of class. And so I think where we are now is we have a commission, we have a vision for where we are headed, we have hired a postdoc to come in to do 3 years of research, and we have developed a website. So we're in the early stages of this, but things are really ramping up as we speak.
I'm thankful for the University of Virginia and for President Sullivan to establish this commission and to celebrate the life of those slaves who worked real hard. And so I thank God for her, and we bless their efforts of the commission and look for great things.
I think one of the benefits of the commission and the work of the commission is to take the narrative of slavery as people who are objects and move them to a narrative about subjects and about agency and the way agency and subjectness is developed. And by looking at the various communities that have come up around the university, you get a very good sense of, over time, how communities are developed and what is occurring between those communities. How do you move from a foster site to a Canada site? Or how do the fosters operate within the construct of that one particular community? And I think that's the work of the commission as well, and vital to understanding Charlottesville and its development beyond just the university.
Well, I'm really excited about the initiative of the President's Commission on Slavery, because it will bring together research that's already been done about slavery at the university and also conduct further research, just compile it all so it can be used to help people understand the people who were in slavery at the university, to help understand the people who kept them in slavery, and the whole beginnings of the university. That's the period I'm most interested in and know most about. And then use that research for various programs to spread the word about the enslaved community at the university and the conditions of their lives.
When enslaved individuals died, somewhat paradoxically, that was one of the moments where the enslaved community had the most control over their lives. So through death, they controlled their day, that ceremony, that ritual. And enslaved people didn't always have control over their daily rituals.
Downstairs in this pavilion, there's a stone room. It's the original brick and a big place for the stone cooking to take place. And of course, slaves worked right there. I know for a fact that the resident in this pavilion, whose name was George Bladerman, a German scholar brought to the United States who taught modern languages, he owned quite a few slaves, and they were used right here to serve his family. Individual students had slaves. They weren't allowed to bring their own, but they rented them in Charlottesville.
We hear that in Missouri in the present day, policemen beat a black man and then arrest that black man because his blood stained their uniforms. And we hear that in the slavery days, when the University of Virginia owned slaves, that the students beat slaves and beat him so badly that the university chastised him, but didn't punish him in any way because he was a slave. He was a piece of property. So I'm happy to hear about this initiative and to know that the university is going to examine its past and teach us who these people were, these enslaved people. Where did they come from? What did they do? What was their work? What was their life? What was their living about?
One of the difficulties in trying to reconstruct the stories of those who were enslaved is that we often only have access to a very small part of their history. They might be mentioned in a document by a slave owner, and so we might know their name. We might know what jobs they held at the plantation. We might know who their other family members are, but we're unlikely to have access to the rest of their life, to understand the people they loved, the people they lost through death or disease, the people who might have been sold away through the slave trade. We usually have a difficult time reconstructing the full richness of their lives.
We have to do something tangible, more than a monument, more than a memorial, but something that creates, if you will, a heartfelt ministry to those who suffered. And that could be, even if we said there were 67 bodies, we know there are many more. What if we were to say something like, we're going to have 67 scholarships?
I'll be conducting the historical research in the archives. I'll also be working in the community, gathering stories and oral history from the African American community, many of whom are likely descendants of those who were enslaved at the university. I want to uncover every single story that could be written or passed down through generations. I want to know the names of all the people who were enslaved here. I want to know how their life was on a daily basis. I want to know how they were treated, how they survived, and what kind of community they created within the bonds of enslavement at the university.
I personally hope that this commission, and I feel honored to be a part of it as an alumni of the university, I feel like this commission has the opportunity to set a national dialogue, to continue to be a leader, to take its rightful place with Monticello in the important history that Thomas Jefferson had in our country, and also to take leadership as a university on dealing with the issues of racial legacies and histories that make us uncomfortable.
My concern is that we did not know one name for these people, because we really realized that they were important. And as I address my congregation, I am sure that the very people I'm talking to are relatives of some of the people who are buried in that cemetery. But I am encouraged because this means that now we're looking. And as we look and as we open the books and the Open the archives, I'm certain that we'll find more about this. But for us as a community, it is a good thing that these people are being remembered and honored.
Yes, we have come a long way, and only the most embittered, only the most irrational would suggest otherwise. But we should not be too tied to these progressivist narratives, and that the hope is that the commission will allow us to look more soberly on the very concept of progress and how sluggish it can be.
This is a big question. I would like for, at the end of the next 3 years, for there to be a much more significant understanding of the relationship of slavery to the university and a better understanding about the lives of the enslaved here at the university. And I would like to see this material much more powerfully incorporated into the very fabric of the university.
I am incredibly excited about the next 3 years of research, and I hope to uncover all the hidden stories of the people who were enslaved here at the university. And most importantly, I'm looking forward to unsilencing the silent.
We've learned the story of Henry Martin, for example, and we've commemorated his role at the chapel. But there must be other people we didn't know about whose roles at the university were unknown and not commemorated and not told to other generations simply because of the color of their skin. So there is a history there that is part of the university history, and we need to know it to have a complete history of ourselves. But we also know that history carries forward in some ways to our present time. Maybe it will help shed light on issues of diversity that affect our community, that affect the Commonwealth, that affect the whole United States, if we can begin to forthrightly understand our own history.
This is just the beginning. The President's Commission on Slavery and the University charge is to explore and develop the research infrastructure and provide advice and recommendations on commemoration of the contributions by the enslaved to the university. In addition to the African American Cemetery commemoration, there are many other possibilities, including physical monuments, documentaries, naming buildings after slaves, establishing scholarships and professorships, and interactive educational media in the Rotunda Visitor Center. The work of this commission will continue into the bicentennial. We are thankful for the support of the university, our local and national advisory boards, and for your support. And as I said, this is just the beginning.
Got it? Fantastic. So I'm going to start. This is, I think, really exciting. I describe it as the commission, which was formed right just a little over about a year before you arrived at the university. I describe it as 10 years of ad hoc work. I want to elaborate on that a little bit because you're sitting here coming toward the end of your first semester, and I want you to be thinking about what are the possibilities here. And so this commission really came about because the Memorial for Enslaved Laborers, this is a student group that spent years working dedicated to this. They ran a competition to design a memorial. So this was student activity, organized activity at the university that was key in putting this in front of the Board of Visitors and in front of the President. As well, the university guides became very interested in this over the last few years. And then finally, an alumni group, the Idea Fund, learned from Mel and the U Guides about this work, and it was students who really convinced the president. So they went in and presented to the president and Board of Visitors. So you're sitting here today, if there's something you want to change, you're the people who can change this, whatever it is. So know that. I think this is what's really exciting about this commission. You don't fully get a sense from the video, but it is a big commission. We have 27 people on the commission, and that the video, this is, Eduardo will talk to you more about this, and the process in a little bit, I think is a fantastic culmination. It's more than a culmination of this past year of work, which is, you sit down and what do you do? How do you memorialize slavery? How do you even begin the research project? And we've had a really great discussions. This was premiered at a symposium we had in October. We brought in a series of national scholars for a conversation with UVA and with the community. In the very beginning, you see Dr. Marcus Martin, the other co-chair of the commission, walking. I don't know if any of you visited the University Cemetery, but you should go explore it. There's both a Confederate Civil War cemetery, the old University Cemetery, and a newly commemorated and properly demarcated with fencing and signage African American cemetery. And actually, Dr. Martin was walking in that cemetery in the beginning. So if anybody lives in Lefevre and you had a strange night, was it a Thursday night? It was a Thursday night.
Thursday night.
Thursday night in October, where there were lots of people and singing and strange lights floating around in the cemetery. That was the President's Commission and 300 guests commemorating the cemetery. So that's kind of the background for the commission. I think the video does a good job of explaining, right? We have 3 years of research ongoing. We have a website, so if you are at all interested in this, it's slavery.virginia.edu. You can read their posts about whatever the latest progress is, what are the things we're doing, and I think the video really captures this. We want this to be a long-form, several-year dialogue between now and the bicentennial, where the living, breathing university that we all represent has a conversation with the Charlottesville community and the nation at large about how do we go about doing this commemoration. And we want that messy, sometimes contentious process. It hasn't been contentious yet, but it could be. We want that to be out in the open for everyone to see. And so that's a great way to take a look there. If you're interested in it, please contact me. We have a couple students on the commission, and we welcome student participation on working groups in the commission. So I've had several students come to me who were interested in equality issues in Charlottesville. So if you've had a chance to explore Charlottesville, there's Main Street runs from the university to Charlottesville. It runs along a ridge line where some of the poorer neighborhoods, where the very people who, some of whom may be descendants of the slaves that built and ran this university for 50 years, still live. And there's development happening along there. So, right, I don't know how many of you have signed up for an apartment for next year. A lot of you? Anybody in the flats? Yeah, no, you shouldn't. I never. Yeah, no, I'm not encouraging you, but as you can see here, I'm also a dean in the College of Arts and Sciences, and I spend my days telling students, slow down, slow down, slow down. You're in a hurry to get out of here. This is going to be the best 4 years of your life. I know this semester has been a little tough. But hang in there. This is a great place, and your experience is enriched by the more time you spend in residence on grounds. And don't sign leases with friends unless you're really sure it's going to work out. You'll be crying in my office next fall if there's a problem there. I hope not. Anyway, those buildings, right, this is all urban infill, but what it does is it has a serious impact on the communities that live there. So this story about slavery at the university is really one that has a very long arm that stretches right into the present when we look at inequality here in Charlottesville. So if you don't have to be interested in studying 19th century Virginia to have a place on the commission. So that's kind of the background for the commission. Does anybody have any questions about the commission? Well, good. If you do, you know where to find me. I want to talk a little bit, too, about who I am. And I think this is interesting. I was once a student here at the university. I was an undergraduate at UVA. And my experience as an undergraduate is what led me somehow on a strange career path led me to be sitting here talking to you today as a scholar of the 19th century South. And it began by taking classes in anything that sounded interesting. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought briefly, I kind of knew I wanted to do history, and I thought briefly, I'm going to do Middle Eastern history. Took one class in Middle Eastern history, hated every minute of it. So I'm not going to do this. Whatever this is, I'm not going to do it. Nope. And I took a colonial history class. That was okay. And then I took an African American history class, and the professor, Reginald Butler, who was then running he's retired now, was running the Carter Woodson Institute. He gets up one day, and this is just a survey class, so it's African American history to 1865, and he gives a lecture that's all about the politics of hair during the Civil War and Reconstruction. I'm like, what the politics of hair? The whole class, the TAs, it finishes, everyone sort of sits there, scratches their heads, look, I don't know. But I was like, whatever that was, something powerful just happened. And I know you've already been encouraged to do this, and many of you have done this. I went to his office. I said, what were you talking about? What was that all about? And we had a great conversation, and all of a sudden, I followed him around for the next 3 years and did basically whatever he told me, took a research seminar with him, and he said, pick a county, go explore slaves and free people of color in that county. And I was eager. I want to do Albemarle. And I got to do Albemarle, which turned out to be the beginning of my academic career. So I wrote a little 25-page paper, then became a distinguished major, wrote a major thesis, and met people in the community, learned how to do real research, and then went to graduate school at the Johns Hopkins University. And this is, I want you to be thinking about this, right? Anybody planning to major in a humanity? Only one. Okay, okay, more. Thank you. Yes, good. Yeah. This is not to say don't major in the sciences or go to the comm school. Not at all. Right, Forbes just published an article this week about what do people in the business world want? They want humanities majors. You're the most employable, most trainable people out there. So if anybody tells you don't be an English major, don't listen to them. Anyway, when I got to graduate school, I was one of 2 people in my graduate cohort who did not go to an Ivy League institution. I was better trained than all of them. Like I knew how to, I had done real research. I knew what the literature was all about, and so I was kind of ahead of the game when I got to graduate school. I finished graduate school, took a job at a little teaching college about 70 miles from here, and that was the only job available at the time. And I spent 8 years there, and loved it. I learned how to teach, right? If you're thinking of teaching, you want to be talking to folks in Curry. Graduate school will not teach you how to teach. It'll teach you how to research and teach you how to be a professional. But I had this great experience there where I realized my research and my teaching were actually really intimately connected. And so I started developing a curriculum for my department where I took students to the archives. So first and second years, we're going into the archives, and I'm going to throw you to the wolves. You're going to stand here with all these 19th century documents, and you're going to tell me what happened in the past. And they were the best classes I ever taught. And then 4 years ago, position opened up at UVA. I moved here. I'm thrilled to be back. And I love it because, again, I can share with you my own UVA stories. You've all been enrolling in classes. I'm going to give the same plug I give to everyone. Go take History of Jazz, Music 2120 with Scott DeVoe. Coolest class you'll ever take. Every student I send to it is blown away by it. You don't have to be into music. Just go. It's a cool class. Anyway, that's my final plug. But again, been here for 4 years. I'm a dean in the college, so I do academic advising, and then I teach in the history department. I teach a COLA. Anybody in a COLA? Oh, good. How do you like it? It's good. Okay, good. Yeah, I was like, well, what should I say? Okay, yeah. So this is good. I want you, if any of you become involved as orientation leaders for the incoming first-year class next summer, your job is going to be to sell COLAs to them, because I think they're a really, really rewarding experience that everyone who's in the college should take. So I teach COLAs in the fall, typically. I'm teaching 2 this semester. And in the spring, I teach something in the history department. And this spring, I'm teaching a first and second year seminar, HIUS 1501. It is really kind of following up on the commission. This is, we're going to go, you're all going to go, if you're in this class, 15 students, we're going right into special collections. And you are going to begin investigating the tens of thousands of pages of documents about the early university that are sitting down there. And you're going to figure out your own research project. I'm going to help you. You're going to get some help here. But you're going to design your own research project and write a 12 to 15 page research paper out of those archives. And it's fantastic. It's terrifying at first. But as soon as you get in there and you start to figure, you're going to have the aha moment, and then you're always off and running. And I'm doubly excited about this, and then I'm going to stop talking. I am also one of the founders of a digital humanities project here at the university called Jefferson's University, the Early Life Project, which is digitizing all of the early university records. And this is very ambitious. This is everything. This is letters students wrote. So this is eventually going to spill out into archives that are in North Carolina and Richmond. And we have about 15 students working on the project now. They're doing everything from Excel coding to documentary transcription to archival research. So working on this very project, that'll have a website rolling out in the spring. And so I'm excited. There's synergy in my life. I chair the commission. I'm researching slavery in the archives. I'm running a digital history project that's researching everything in the early archives. And I'm teaching classes where I get to interact with students. And so that's kind of my background. Yeah.
Yes.
Tell us about your perfect life.
Well, I'm really surprised when I can hear people talk the way that you do, because my way of talking is either behind the camera or the keyboard. But that presence that I've seen you before in front of students and is something that I envy a lot, and it has to do a lot with the type of work that I do. Why do I say this? I love reading, but I always was more curious about what other people thought about what I was reading. So I will take a book, I will read it, and then I will give it to other people to read, and I will ask them to tell me what they read. I was interested in the way that information, stories change according to the perspective of the individual who is reading it. That, I think, was one of the main reasons that drove me to start making documentaries, is to start harvesting testimonies. That also had to do with the time in which I grew up. As I was growing up, and I was about 16 years old, I was caught in the middle of a civil war. So I didn't have much choices. I had to choose between a gun or a camera. I had to shoot with something because everybody was shooting at everyone else. And I thought, first of all, that the camera was extremely more sexy than a gun, and that a lot of things could be done with it. And I had a great deal of admiration by a filmmaker called Raimundo Glaser. You can Google him. He did several films with Globo Rocha in Brazil, in the desert. He was an icon, sort of like a Jim Morrison of the time. And I started working for him until he got killed. So I took his camera and I continued to do my work. This is the time that we grew up listening to the music of Bob Dylan, and the story of Goody Guthrie with his guitar written on the body of the guitar said, "This is a machine to kill fascists." And I go, well, if a guitar can kill fascists, maybe a camera can do the same thing. So I engraved on my camera, "This is a machine to kill fascists." That was a Bolek 60 millimeters, which I still have, and it's in my house in Ivy. So I liked filming, and I couldn't stop. I didn't go to college until I was 45. By then I had already about 62 films made, about 4 books published in fiction and nonfiction, and I was translated into 12 different languages. But I still thought that I needed to go through the experience of organized education, because my education was completely disorganized, was all over the place. I would read absolutely everything that fell into my hands. I would spend most of my happy hours of my youth in old bookstores of Houston and conferences and traveling and speaking to people that I have a great deal of admiration. This will never stop me. I will pick up the phone and call, find out through either. There was a time when everybody was in the white pages. So I remember landing in Milan and for a film festival, and I go like, this is where Umberto Eco lives. So I just went to a phone booth and I started looking, Eco, Umberto. So pick up the phone, and on the other side, this voice in Italian says, can I help you? And I go like, it's Umberto Eco, this is me. And I go like, well, this is, and I say with a great deal of arrogance, this is Eduardo Montes-Bradley. I'm from Buenos Aires and I came to see you. And I think he made a mistake. He thought probably we had an appointment. This is one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, probably. And he says, well, but not before 2. And I go, it's okay, I'll be there at 2:30. Says, well, so I went over there and I spent 6 hours listening to Umberto Eco, which to me, my education was Umberto Eco, was Leon Rosichner, was Ismael Viñas, was some of the brightest minds that I grew up reading. And then after reading the book, I will just phone the person and said, why did you say this on chapter 16, page whatever? And so I like to define myself as a tireless curious. And I work on several subjects. At the same time, I relocated with my family to Charlottesville 4 years ago. And one of the main reasons was schools for my children, of course. I needed to be about 100 miles from the Atlantic coast and about 600 feet high, because I don't like earthquakes or tsunamis. So I ran away from California because of the earthquake of 1965, and then I got hit by the tornado the hurricane in Florida, and then I have bad memories of the earthquake in Managua in 1973, and I go like, I had enough of these geographical nightmares. I need time to work.
So you brought the earthquake here.
I think the earthquake, well, the minute I moved into my new house in Ivy, there was an earthquake, and I said, it's me. Because I'm half Jewish, so I do have this guilt, that. And I go like, maybe I brought it up on everybody else in Charlottesville. And the thing is, I need to be close to, one of the premises was to be close to a university, because that's where I tap. I need my intellectual fix. So where would I find that if it's not close to a university? So that brought me immediately into subjects which I was very much curious about as a foreigner. One was the African American experience, because it's something we don't know anything about. We know in reductionist terms. We know in terms of black and white, good and evil, but it's a lot more complex than that, and I want to know more. So that's why I got close to Julian Bond, and the same way that I got close to Umberto Eco, I picked up the phone and called Julian and said, Julian, we need to talk. He was like, who are you? Well, next thing we did this film called Julian Bond, then a film on Rita Dove, and then I was approached by Dr. Martin Marcus, because I do institutional films. The way that I make a living is doing institutional films. And then I do the other films without any support, but with the entire freedom to do and say what I want to say. So I was retained, let's put it that way, to do this film on the commission, and I just was fascinated by the way that it works and by the fact that the film was needed, like a good Jew born in Buenos Aires in 1960, I need to be needed. And the idea that this polyphonic ensemble of different voices is struggling to clarify something that is so difficult. There is no physical evidence. There is physical evidence, but there is no photographic evidence. Yeah. There is no images, and they are asking me to create an image testimony of a time where there are no images left. So this was a challenge for me, a wonderful challenge. And also my job, in a sense, is to put my glasses on, to make an institution of film, but conserve the critical thinking behind it. So I do have to pick and choose. And I don't want to be complacent with the commission or with the university or with the cost that's put it. It has to be, the film has to be a clear, concise testimonial of a time in which bright minds got together around a subject to try to decode it. So that's what I thought it was my job, and that's what I think I did. Well, that's pretty much my life. Do I leave everything outside? No, I think that we can take some. I think that we should take some questions now. Yeah. What was that? Well, if you scroll it down, the good thing about having the Wikipedia page is having the list of almost 80 films. But I think that it's the 4 marriages that got it.
The 4 marriages? I didn't think we were going to bring that up. Since you have, I'm sure there'll be questions, right? We just had a session on lifelong love yesterday, the series, but I guess you have another take on that. I will just take that.
She gets scared when
Questions? Yeah.
Questions, please.
Thoughts? Reactions?
Well, actually, I have a question.
Please.
Earlier, you made reference to the possible contentious nature of this project.
Mm-hmm.
And would you give me an example of some kind of conflict or someone who doesn't think this is a good idea or who has implicitly criticized your approach?
Oh, that's the good news. No, there has. I think there's bound to be some at some point. I know the commission has openly wrestled with this, and this is not contentious about should we investigate slavery. It's a question about where does this stop. Is this really a question about inequality, about social justice? Where do we go? So we looked at the other institutions have been doing this for the past decade. So Brown University in 2003 formed an entire commission. They have an institute that's, again, about social justice and examined their own past and the connection, right? Brown is founded on money from the slave trade. And really every university in America that is founded before the Civil War is implicated in this, right? A third of all wealth in America before the Civil War is tied up in slaves in some way. That is the economic juggernaut. So I don't think there's contention about revealing the slave past. You heard Professor Jordan in the video kind of suggest that there are forces. I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago that might have been true.
To say that this is a box, an inquiry that should not be opened?
Yeah. Well, and again, it's hard to tell now. You can hear it, I think, implicitly in the earlier memorial. So does any of you seen a memorial to slavery at the university? I love asking this question because no one ever has. They exist. The first one was put in 2007. You can't get to it now because the rotunda is closed off. But it's in the underground walkway on the south side of the rotunda. And right as you step through on the west side, there's a slate piece set in the ground that's 18 inches wide, I guess. And on it is inscribed, see if I can get this straight, we thank the free and enslaved laborers who who helped to build the university and bring Jefferson's vision to reality. And I think it captures what the old dilemma was in some way, that sure, we need to talk about slavery, but we don't want to get too far into it because it might embarrass the university, and I think it's a problem at UVA sometimes, right? Jefferson, it's always back to Jefferson, and I think that plaque really does a disservice, right? It doesn't, well-meaning though it is, it doesn't acknowledge that it wasn't just slaves who built when you walk on that terraced lawn, that was an abandoned farm ridgeline. It didn't look anything like that. So slaves by hand shaped that very ground. Every brick that's in those buildings was dug out of the ground, shaped, molded, and cooked by slave laborers, and then hauled over here by slave labor. So it doesn't fully capture what was going on, and then it ignores, right? Slavery ends when the university opens. And in fact, when the university opens, it opens in 1825. There are 65 students when it opens, and there are at least 100 slaves living on grounds, right? This story is, for the first several years, there are probably more slaves than students on any given day. By the 1850s, it's shifted, but there's still, right, slaves are a really significant component of the labor force here. And then finally, I think that plaque unwittingly does a disservice, right? It's not about slaves, it's about Jefferson's vision. And if you're going to commemorate slavery, you have to kind of push Jefferson into a different spot to
And there is something else about that plaque, is that it's laid horizontally on the floor, so you step on it.
And
which is not the best way to, and it's on the way, on the passage of ways under the arch.
So that you have to stop
and turn around
and then look down and read.
And it's also like a grave. It looks like the type of a stone on top of a grave. It's dark. It's hard to read.
Yep.
So it is it's lapidarium is to use a word of Roman origin. It's lapidarium. It's like it discloses the issue, which I don't think it's true. But the other issue that is interesting in terms of contingents is they're at a very early stage, and they're starting to determine, for example, what is the difference between reparation and reparations.
Yeah.
So when we talk about reparation, in a case like this, and I have worked before in issues, similar issues in Palestine and in Argentina and in Chile, when you talk reparation, you're referring to repairing the injustice, the historical injustice. Right. When you talk reparations, you're talking money.
Yeah.
And that is a Pandora box that no one wants to open. And it shouldn't be, I personally believe that it shouldn't be open because it never ends. It's like, besides you don't even have the clear, you don't have the names, you don't know who the people are, you don't know where to, there are ways of repairing it, but when you say reparations, it's very difficult. And I think that probably the Commission is also discussing this. I know they are, and I think that is important.
And when you look at, when this becomes an issue, when you reach out into the community, I've been really impressed, right? There's actually been a lot of goodwill. People have shown up, I think, with some trepidation and not fully convinced that we were serious or that this commission was going to go anywhere. But we've held community engagement forums so we can get people in and have that conversation. And the issue of reparations has come up. And you can tell there's, again, goodwill and hope that we're going to do something powerful and lasting and important. But a sense that, for the students in the African American community in Charlottesville, the university is known as the Big Plantation, right? This is a place that has a long history, and that's what I was talking about earlier, right? That this is not just about 1865, and I think as you reach beyond 1865, you get into these issues. It was at one of these community forums that a gentleman stood up and he almost started to cry talking about a neighborhood. I've lived here for 20 years and know Charlottesville really well. Didn't know about this neighborhood. Gospel Hill. So it was an African-American neighborhood where the new hospital is, the big white building the helicopters land on, right? That was an African-American neighborhood that was just sort of quietly kind of pushed out. And this is that same issue that we're confronting with the development along West Main Street right now. And I don't think the development now is explicitly linked to any sort of racist project, but there's a reason to believe this. So again, this is all before your time, But back in the 1960s, the buzzword was urban renewal, and there was federal money available to clean up inner cities and clean up downtowns. Charlottesville took these funds, and this is typical. Many segregated towns did exactly this. They took the funds, and it was used to slum removal. And in the South, slum removal always was an explicitly racial component. And so there was a neighborhood called Vinegar Hill, which is now kind of where the Omni, there's a hotel, I think it's a Marriott, I'm not sure. There's a new hotel going up kind of near the Lewis and Clark statue. And when you drive down there, you can tell it's still kind of empty. There's parking lots. It hasn't really been filled in. They ran police raids, arrested a lot of people, evicted everyone else, built a project that's tucked away in a corner where you can't see it, and then bulldozed the whole neighborhood because a hotel was going to come. And the Omni didn't come for about 30 years, right? So it sat there as this kind of trash-strewn field. And I don't remember the mayor's name, but in the African-American community, right, the field was long known derisively after that mayor. And so we definitely hear tensions when we talk about this kind of how we link modern justice to this story. And that's going to be, I think, where we have to have the discussions. And I think some of them are going to be contentious. I know I had a really good talk with the head of the local NAACP about this, who said, you have to talk about reparations. And I said, I agree with Eduardo. I think when you talk about, it's a very political term in 21st century US, right? And it has this, in fact, they've done surveys on it, right? The widest racial disparity ever recorded in a poll is all about reparations. And it was, right, African Americans, people of color were generally very supportive of it. Whites were incredibly non-supportive of it, but the data on whites was actually a little off because a significant portion of the white people who took it were so outraged by the question, they didn't finish the question. Right, so this is, as soon as you talk about this, it's kryptonite. So we've been trying to do on the commission is, let's talk about that, let's get that on the table, but shift this to discussion about reparation, right? How do we create something out of what the commission does that's lasting? So when the bicentennial rolls around, right, we haven't just finished, we release a report, it gets stuck in the library, and we don't talk about it again. And I think one of the things you should all be thinking about is when you walk around the old academical village, so Central Grounds, where are the slave sites? There's nothing telling you where they are. They are everywhere, right? Every garden was a slave work yard. Yeah. There were outbuildings in all those gardens where slaves lived. There are now McGuffey Cottage, the Cracker Box, which is a little two-story structure behind Pavilion 10, was a slave kitchen with a dwelling above it. And so
everything.
Yeah,
the entire university is a tribute to the work of enslaved people.
And that's one of the hopes, is that at a minimum, right, we create some sort of trail where there's signage. We've even looked at, right, the cellars under the lawn rooms on the east side were largely slave dwelling spaces. In fact, we're even used, was it a nurse that you talked to in the 40s?
That was, I was at a service in the First Baptist Church on Main Street, and I kept looking at this extraordinary looking woman. And I waved like this with my finger, like with my camera, like, it's okay if I... And she said yes. So, of course, I ended up in her house having tea. And I took pictures and recorded her. And she was 101 years old. Her name is Annie Merritt. And she moved here from North Carolina. And her first job was in 1949. At the hospital right here in the basement, double segregation, because the ward was only for black women. So men were segregated from women and blacks from whites. So, and she was telling me all this story. And this happened yesterday. So when we talk about, when the whole issue of reparations comes up and the whole thing of legacy comes up, it's the history, you cannot look at history. I mean, you cannot look at history in blocks. They're not isolated incidents. There's a history to take into consideration here. So this is 1949, and she's alive, and she's telling me the story now. So there's a connection with the past.
We have to continue this conversation for sure. We need to give them a round of applause. I would like to give you a present of our appreciation.
Thank you so much.
We have for you, Eduardo.
Thank you.
Some Brown College stickers.
Ooh.
Share them with your children. or
Absolutely.
whatever.
Oh, fantastic.
And we will continue this conversation at the Hill House.